grand final during an 8-year span in 1934 and managed to win its 4th flag by beating South Melbourne, whose full forward, Bob Pratt, booted 150 goals in 21 matches. Pratt's tally included 5 bags of 10 goals or more, and his total still stands as a record, alongside Hawthorn's Peter Hudson. Pratt's most memorable performance during the season was his 15 goals against Essendon, including 8 in a magical 12-minute burst in the last quarter. Pratt was again in the news the following year, 1935, but for very different reasons. South was hot favourite to win the grand final against Collingwood, but Pratt was hit by a truck while catching a tram on the eve of the big match and was replaced by Herbie Matthews, who won the Brownlow 5 years later.
I went home for lunch. I went all the way from South Melbourne. No cars in those days. You had to catch trams and buses, whatever you could get on. I go home to lunch and I'm coming out to up the street to catch the tram to go back to South Melbourne, and the tram pulled up and I stepped off the sideway and a fella came along with 5 ton of bricks and he hit me. But just while I had the reflexes, because he got me and I'd sort of jumped to them. He got the leg of me trousers and tore the heel out of my pants. I sort of went back onto the footpath. It didn't seem so bad at the time, but there was a lot of thing, and of course when I killed off, I was gone.
A crowd of 54,000 spectators arrived, and they were shocked to learn that Pratt was not in his customary position for his team. South won the toss and opened up a 15-point lead at the first break after bombarding the goals for most of the term. But Collingwood, led brilliantly by centreman Marcus Whelan, pegged back South, and by half-time, Collingwood had grabbed a 10-point lead. While South persisted with playing the flanks, Collingwood adopted a more direct approach to goal. And with Gordon Coventry and the Collier brothers in great form, the Magpies added yet another premiership to its trophy cabinet. After half-time, Collingwood kicked 5 goals, while South watched its hopes disappear when it could add only 3. The Magpies' victory was the club's 10th premiership, with Jock McHale being at the helm in 7 of them. The match was also memorable because field umpire Bob Scott officiated in his 7th successive grand final, a record which still stands. 1936 was again Collingwood's year, and it was achieved without Gordon Coventry in the goal square. After a toe-to-toe stoush with Richmond's Joe Murdoch, Coventry was rubbed out by the tribunal for 8 matches, which meant an early end of the season for the brilliant Magpie. But Coventry's suspension was a mild one compared to Essendon's Bryce, who copped 18 weeks for kicking. In a row when the club lined up against Geelong in the grand final. The Cats had won the previous 13 matches, but at half-time the teams were locked together in a tremendous exhibition of football. However, Geelong finished the stronger by booting 6 goals to 1 in the final quarter to win the match by 32 points. The grand final was also significant because it marked the last match for Collingwood's legendary Gordon Coventry, who turned 36 on the day of the big match. Earlier in the season, he'd been the first VFL player to chalk up 300 games, and during his magnificent 17-year career, Coventry kicked 1,299 goals, a record in 306 matches for an average of just over 4 goals a match. Round 13 in 1938 was probably the most exciting in league history because there were 4 one-point results. By the time Carlton and Collingwood lined up for the grand final, interest in league football was at its peak, and the largest crowd ever to see a football match in Australia, 96,384, were shoehorned into the MCG. The Blues' pre-match tactics played a vital part in the club's victory. Carlton was aware that Magpie skipper Albert Collier was carrying a leg injury into the game, and to ensure he remained on the field and not replaced by a fit player, the Blues were instructed not to bump him. Collier was a liability and finished the game limping badly, while 19th man Carmody remained on the bench. The other impressive tactic was the decision to position Carlton's half-forwards, Schmidt and Sophie Valance, who was playing his last game, wide, to allow the Blues to attack through Jack Rout at centre half-forward. The match was a fierce contest, and after the initial softening up period in the first quarter, the Blues led by a point. Carlton, with 4 quick goals in the closing 5 minutes of the second quarter, gave the Blues a 20-point half-time advantage. Despite some desperate play by the Magpies, which saw them get to within 4 points after Ron Todd goal, the Carlton players rose to the challenge. and the VFL Premiership pennant headed to Princes Park for the first time in 23 years. In 1939, St Kilda enjoyed its first final success since 1913 when they defeated Richmond in the first semi-final. But in the preliminary final, they had no answer to Collingwood full forward Ron Todd, who kicked 11 goals and led his team into the grand final where Melbourne was waiting. The Magpies started brilliantly with 6 goals in the first quarter, but Melbourne hit back hard to lead by 4 points at half-time. After the interval, the Magpies managed only 4 goals, while the Demons piled on 11 to win their third premiership. On reflection, it was a sad grand final because 3 members of the Melbourne premiership team, Keith Bluey Truscott, Harry Ball and wingman Sid Anderson, were killed in action during the Second World War, a war declared shortly before the end of the season. The trio were among 37 VFL players to be killed. Men entering the services. At the end of the home and away series, Melbourne occupied top spot on the ladder after dropping just 4 games during the season. Although Richmond defeated the Demons in the first semi-final, Melbourne reversed the result in the grand final. Melbourne, hit hard by injuries, were unable to name its grand final side until just before the start of play. On the sodden ground, Melbourne started well and held a commanding 7-goal lead at half-time. Richmond made numerous positional changes at three-quarter time, and although 2 quick goals narrowed the gap, Norm Smith continued to kick accurately and ended the match with 7 goals. The war had a devastating effect on league football in 1941, and very few footballers were available for selection. However, both wartime Prime Ministers, Menzies and Curtin, maintained that sport would boost morale. Attendances dropped by an average of 66,000 a week, and in 1942, Geelong pulled out of the competition because of wartime travel restrictions, leaving the VFL with a bye each week. Melbourne, which won the premiership in 1939, 1940 and 41, dropped to 8th spot on the ladder, following the retirement of its great coach, Checker Hughes. Essendon won the premiership in 1942, Richmond was successful in 1943, Fitzroy in 44 and Carlton in 1945. Many people believed the victories were hollow ones because of the war-torn competition, but their comments didn't impress the supporters of these clubs. Many supporters also weren't too impressed with the 45 grand final between the Blues and South Melbourne, a match which will be forever known as the Bloodbath. To give an indication of how tough some of the Carlton players were was the fact that club captain Bob Chitty played in the match despite chopping off one of his fingers at work. The South players were promised the massive sum of £20 a man for a win, an enormous incentive for any player in that era. The match was fast and furious from the opening bounce at Princes Oval. Kicking with the wind, Carlton could only manage 1 goal in the first 15 minutes, and the team looked most unimpressive. South, through Smith and Nash, kicked 2 early goals in the second quarter. But then the grand final erupted into violence. Chitty flattened South's Ron Clegg, and shortly after, his teammate Billy Williams hit the deck after being fixed up by Chitty. Price then goaled for Carlton, but as the ball was being relayed back to the centre, Carlton's Ken Hands was KO'd as 63,000 fans called for blood and an all-in brawl developed. The final quarter began with a bang when Chitty was dropped. Players, trainers, ambulance men and officials converged onto the field and police had to break up the fight. Carlton ended up winning the match. Then umpires spent 2 hours filling out their report sheets. 10 players appeared before the tribunal and only 2 escaped suspension. The remaining 8 players were suspended for a total of 75 weeks, an average of 9 per player. With the war over, the 1946 season saw the introduction of the under-19 grade and the reintroduction of the Brownlow medal. The VFL also introduced a second reserve, who was known as the 20th man. South Melbourne and Carlton battled to live up to their infamous 1945 grand final form, and South's Bob Pratt was forced to abort his comeback when he suffered a serious knee injury in the opening round. Geelong avoided the wooden spoon in the final round by winning at home against Footscray. In fact, the Bulldogs failed to win another match at Kardinia Park until 1972, 26 years later. Essendon, which had finished on top of the ladder at the end of the home and away series, won the grand final by producing a tremendous third quarter by beating 11 goals to 1 against Melbourne to seal the match by more than 10 goals. It was the start of a golden era for the Bombers, who were to play in 6 successive grand finals, which netted the club 3 flags. During the 47 season, there are a number of highlights, but none better than that of Melbourne's Fred Fanning, who kicked 18 goals from 19 attempts against St Kilda in his last match. Carlton also stunned the football world by appointing Ern Henfrey as captain, even though he'd played only 2 games, whilst on leave from the RAAF in 1944. Henfrey led the Blues to the grand final, and before a crowd of more than 85,000, Carlton watched in amazement as the Dons peppered the goals but were hopelessly off target. At quarter time, Essendon was on 3-7, while the Blues managed 4 straight goals. Less than 2 goals separated the teams at half and 3/4 time, and the last quarter turned out to be a nerve-wracking affair. And with 10 minutes to go, Essendon led by 12 points. But Carlton then bombarded the Dons' defence, and when Davies goaled after outmanoeuvring Riddell, the Blues were only a straight kick behind. Henfrey, who'd vindicated Carlton's faith in him, dominated in the centre and continued to send his side into attack. And after a series of blunders near goal, half-forward Fred Stafford snapped the goal with 44 seconds of the grand final to go. There was barely time to restart the match when the bell sounded to signal a 1-point victory to Carlton, the closest grand final since Collingwood beat Fitzroy back in 1903. But if the 1947 grand final was a nail-biter, it was nothing compared to the corresponding match a year later when Essendon came up against Melbourne. The Dons' year-long superiority was confirmed in the second semi when they beat Melbourne by 6 goals to chalk up their 12th consecutive win to be a hot favourite to win their 9th flag. But in one of the club's most deplorable efforts in front of goal, the Dons could only manage a draw, the first tied grand final in league history. Essendon kicked an unbelievable 7-27 to tie with the Demons, who scored 10-9. In the replay, it was Melbourne who adapted the better in the wet conditions to win its 6th premiership. Was the year Essendon finally unveiled the extraordinary goal-kicking machine named John Coleman, who had been chased by every club in the league. Widely regarded as the best player in VFL history, Coleman vindicated Essendon's faith in him by launching himself on VFL football in sensational fashion. In his first game against Hawthorn, the freakish bomber kicked a stunning 12 goals. Coleman quickly became the league's first genuine superstar, and for the first time in the history of the game, many spectators simply went to matches to watch him play, even though they had no allegiance to the Bombers. In his debut season, Coleman booted 100 goals and was the man who guided Essendon to its record grand final win against Carlton. Essendon's superiority continued in 1950, and with Coleman kicking another century of goals, the Bombers charged through the season with 17 wins from 18 matches. Predictably, Essendon won the grand final against North Melbourne, and Coleman's 4 goals took his 2-season tally with Essendon to an amazing 220 goals. But 1951 dealt Coleman a crushing blow. In the last home and away match, he was suspended for 4 matches for striking Carlton's Harry Casper and was suspended for 4 games. Hundreds of fans stood outside Harrison House for the verdict, and when they saw Coleman emerge with tears streaming down his face, they knew the worst had happened. Their hero was to miss the grand final. The Bombers plunged from favourites for their 3rd successive flag to rank outsiders. That was an indication of Coleman's value to the side. Geelong seized on the advantage to beat the Bombers and thus win its first premiership in 14 years. The Cats' Bernie Smith capped off a great year by winning the Brownlow medal. The Cats, led by the likes of Bob Davis, were again dominant in 1952 and thrashed Collingwood by 46 points in the grand final. The Cats again made the grand final in 1953, but failed to win a hat-trick of flags when Collingwood took the match by only 2 goals. 1954 was Footscray's year. In fact, it remains the club's only premiership when it crushed Melbourne by 51 points. The era from 1955 to 1958 belonged to 2 teams, Melbourne and Collingwood. 55 marked the start of the Demons' golden run of flags. With a star-studded lineup, the Demons beat the Magpies in the 1955 and 56 grand finals. In 1957, Hawthorn temporarily grabbed the limelight by playing in its first final series since joining the VFL in 1925. Led brilliantly by ruckman John Kennedy, the Hawks beat Carlton in the first semi-final by 23 points in atrocious conditions. But the Hawks' run crashed in the preliminary final when Melbourne humbled the precocious newcomers by 68 points. to become hot favourites to emulate Collingwood's performance of 1927 through until 30 in winning 4 premierships in a row. Once again, the Demons faced their arch-rivals Collingwood in the big match. Melbourne kicked 5 goals to 2 in the opening quarter, and a 4th consecutive flag looked a formality. But in the second quarter, a 98,000-strong crowd sensed Melbourne was starting to wilt under the fierce, hard-hitting Magpies, who had Barry, Hooker, Harrison roughing out Barassi and Weideman, doing likewise to Mythen. An explosive third term saw Melbourne slip out of the game after Collingwood kicked 5 unanswered goals to take a 33-point lead into the final quarter. Although the Magpies kicked only 1 point in the final term, the Collingwood defence, led superbly by Sullivan and Reeves, limited the Demons to 2 goals, and the Pies rejoiced their 13th premiership victory. Clearly, its greatest. It was the Demons' 4th premiership of the 50s, and they were clear favourites to win the first grand final of the 60s too. The preliminary final between Collingwood, the Demons' great foe, and Fitzroy was one of the most exciting in years. Playing in mud and slush, both teams showed the form which many believed would upset the Demons in the grand final a week later. Scores between the Magpies and the Lions were close all day, but Beers kicked a behind to put the Magpies a point in front late in the game, and then Rover Burns' goal to enable Collingwood to grab a 7-point lead. Fitzroy peppered the goals, but managed only 2 behinds to give Collingwood a hard-fought 5-point victory. After Collingwood's slog in the preliminary final, Melbourne was rightly confident of winning yet another premiership. Conditions for the big match were terrible, and the Demons took advantage of their lethargic opponents by kicking 4-3 to nothing in the first quarter. The Magpies' first major score didn't come until the 3-minute mark of the second quarter, and by half-time, Melbourne held a commanding lead. The Demons added another 3 goals for the match, while Collingwood kicked only 1, and the team's total of 2 goals, 2 behinds remains the lowest grand final score since the formation of the league. 1961 signalled the breaking of the league's finals monopoly when St Kilda, Hawthorn and Footscray joined Melbourne in the 4. Apart from the perennial grand finalists Melbourne, only Footscray had won a flag in 1954. The Bulldogs, led by captain-coach Ted Whitten, ended the finals' hopes of both St Kilda and Melbourne. The Hawks had earlier moved into the grand final by finishing too strongly for Melbourne in the second semi-final. So, for the first time, 2 clubs who'd been admitted to the VFL in 1925 played off in the grand final. At half-time, the pacey Bulldogs held a slender lead, but Hawthorn, with skipper Graham Arper and centreman Brendan Edwards providing plenty of drive, kicked 6 goals 6 in the third quarter to grab a 27-point lead at the last change. John Kennedy's super-fit Chargers added another 4 goals in the final quarter to win its first premiership by 43 points. Kennedy, in only his second year at the helm, was the mastermind behind the memorable victory. 1962 turned out to be a monumental year for the VFL, which bought 212 acres of land in Waverley as a development site for a world-class stadium for the home of league football. 62 was also Neil Roberts' last year as St Kilda captain. The Saints, after making the finals the year before in Alan Jean's first year as coach, could only finish 6th on the ladder. In this match between St Kilda and Hawthorn, Jeans was opposed to John Kennedy, one of the earliest clashes between these 2 men who were to become coaching legends. Another great league personality was North Melbourne's Alan Aylett, who became the first Roo to play 200 games. Aylett won North's best and fairest in 1958, 59 and 60, but tasted little success in his playing days. That came in the mid-70s when, as president of North, he guided the Roos to their first premiership.
Jack Dyer even took time out to show a couple of youngsters by the names of Kevin Bartlett and Michael Irwin how to kick a football. Melbourne's 10-year reign as a league power disintegrated and 3 clubs moved to new grounds. Richmond to the MCG, North Melbourne to Coburg and St Kilda to Moorabbin. In the Saints' first home match against Collingwood, a crowd of more than 51,000 witnessed the home team's 1-goal win. A huge attendance was also at Glenferrie Oval to watch Ron Barassi's debut as captain-coach of Carlton. The Saints continued their good form, and on the Queen's birthday round, they beat Melbourne by 10 goals, the first such hiding the Demons had suffered since Norm Smith started coaching the team in 1952. Not long after, following a loss to Richmond, the Melbourne committee stunned the football world by sacking Smith and replacing him with Checker Hughes. However, only 5 days later, Smith was reinstated, but the damage had been done and Melbourne finished 7th, the first time the club had missed the finals since 1954. By the end of the home and away matches, St Kilda had become the new glamour team and for the first time in its history occupied top spot on the ladder. In the second semi-final, the Saints held on to beat Collingwood by a point and St Kilda marched into its first grand final since 1913. The club also rejoiced when centreman Ian Stewart won the first of his 3 Brownlow medals. The 1965 preliminary final between Collingwood and Essendon was notable for 2 reasons. It marked the debut of Magpie ruckman Len Thompson and also saw the Bombers' John Somerville KO'd 10 minutes into the first quarter, an incident which spurred Essendon on to win by 55 points. In the grand final, Essendon jumped to an early lead against St Kilda and a great third quarter in which the Bombers kicked 5 goals to 1 set up Essendon's 12th premiership and the team became only the 3rd to take the flag from 4th position since the paid system of finals was introduced in 1931. 12 months later, the Saints received another setback in their quest for a premiership when in the last home and away match, ruckman Carl Ditrich was reported and was subsequently suspended for 6 weeks. But Ian Stewart buoyed confidence at the club by winning another Brownlow, and the Saints moved into their second successive grand final, this time against Collingwood. In one of the most celebrated grand finals in history, scores were locked together for most of the afternoon, and at 3/4 time, the Saints led by just 4 points. The final quarter was nothing short of amazing. Collingwood's Gabelich missed an easy shot early in the term. Then St Kilda's Moran and Neal added 3 goals, and the Saints grabbed a 13-point lead. Collingwood attacked relentlessly, and after Pitt goaled and Tuddenham kicked a behind, scores were level with 2 minutes remaining. The crowd was at fever pitch, and when young Saint Barry Breen wobbled through a point, St Kilda was headed for its first premiership. In 1967, Richmond was the dominant team, and the Tigers scored the highest number of points since Essendon's total in 1950. Although Richmond trounced Carlton by 40 points in the second semi-final, it lost ruckman Neville Crowe for 4 weeks after he allegedly struck the Blues' John Nichols. Geelong was in great form and easily moved into the grand final by beating Carlton in the preliminary final, despite trailing by 37 points at half-time. After the interval, the Cats kicked 11 goals to 1 to set up a clash with the Tigers. This grand final, like the corresponding match the year before, was a beauty. During the final term, scores were level 4 times before 2 quick goals to Ronaldson and Bartlett broke the deadlock. And despite some desperate Geelong attacks, the flag was Richmond's, the club's first since 1943.
Was gearing itself for the Olympic Games. Just a few miles from the MCG, HSV7 was preparing for a trial telecast of the grand final. The man sent to cover the match, race caller Bill Collins.
I remember parking myself up beside the smoker stand there and having a copy of The Sun in front of me with all the names on it and going away to my heart's content on the grand final. I can remember Melbourne winning the game very, very easily. The highlights are a bit obscure to me now, but well, it was nice to think that I was the first to do a televised football match.
And that was your last match?
That was my last as well.
By the time Neil Roberts had won the Brownlow medal in 1958, television and football had developed a youthful but slightly distant rapport. From 1957 until 1959, the VFL allowed direct televised coverages of the last quarter and special news events. Heading Ch7's telecasts was Tony Charlton. Australian football, it was claimed by overseas experts, was a game that could never be properly televised. The action was too far away and the players moved too quickly. It was Australian television's infancy, and in those early years the game was dominated by Norm Smith's Demons. Melbourne went into this 1958 grand final overwhelming favourites. It had won the premiership in 1955, in the Olympic year of 1956, and again in 1957. With a hat-trick of flags behind them, the Demons were greedily eyeing Collingwood's 28-year-old record of 4 successive premierships. It was a rugged encounter, and tempers flared after over Ian Ridley and Collingwood's Bill Sarong clashed. For the match, both sides were forced to alter players' numbers after a newspaper had published the list that morning. At half-time, Collingwood led by only 2 points. Melbourne coach Norm Smith tried desperately to urge his players to forget the roughhouse tactics and settle down to the style of football that had made them Australia's outstanding team. In the Magpie camp, Fonts Kine could feel the first stirrings of victory. His team had ruffled Melbourne in the wet, sloppy conditions in the second and third quarters, with Murray Weideman and Barry Harrison applying the muscle. And now in the last quarter, Collingwood had only to hold on for victory. And hold on they did. The Magpies could manage only 1 point, but more importantly restricted Melbourne to 2 goals for, and victory was theirs by 18 points. They'd stopped Melbourne's run and had blocked the Demons' attempt to win a record equaling 4th premiership in a row. But no one in the crowd of 97,000 could have dreamed that this was to be Collingwood's last major success in nearly a quarter of a century. Essendon met Carlton in the 1959 preliminary final before nearly 66,000 people. It was a wet and miserable day, with both sides vying for a berth against Melbourne in the grand final. Carlton, led by Bugsy Comben, went into the match a slight underdog, having lost their last encounter against the Bombers. It was a match memorable for the VIPs in attendance. As well as the Prime Minister, Mr. Menzies, an ardent Carlton man, the VFL was host to royalty. President Kenneth Luke accompanied Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra of Kent onto the MCG to meet players from both sides. It was bitterly cold, and if you look closely, you can see a very young Sergio Silvani shivering in the background. Also there to see the game that day were the Governor of Victoria, Sir Dallas Brooks, and the Premier, Mr. Bolte. The match turned out to be a low-scoring event, with Essendon successful by 7 points.
Everything ready for the last quarter of this match, and it promises to be a real tense.
By preliminary final day, 1960, 7 had a full commentary team in action. At the microphone, Jeff Raymond, Reg Hickey, and Bert Deacon.
For Collingwood, Gabelich who gets the knockdown. Powell comes out with the ball. Gabelich meets him solidly. Down he goes. In comes McMaster Smith, little half forward. Burns is in there for Collingwood with Lynch. Oh, a nice tap out to McMaster Smith. Picks up the ball. McMaster Smith gets caught. And it comes to Gray, but I think McMaster Smith will take a free kick, yes.
Where Irvine is going to certainly throw this ball up. There it goes. Tall fellows up. Collingwood again. Oh, it's smothered. Has Burns got the ball? He shoots for goal, and it's a goal for sure. Burns, yes. Burns has kicked the goal, and you can almost say for sure that it's a winning goal for Collingwood.
This was the most wanted man in Australia in 1961, Graham Farmer of East Perth.
Well, I'd like to get with a club that is not in the 4, and yet it has a chance of getting into the 4. I'd like to get with a club that I think I could be of use to, rather than be with a club that's been on top. That's the type of club that I'm looking for. I haven't picked anyone in particular, but a club that may be battling and needs someone that perhaps can give them a hand to make the 4.
And after your playing days are over, do you think you'll be interested in a coaching post?
Well, I've always had ambitions to coach a team, but my ambition at the moment is to play football in Victoria, and I haven't given it much thought, to tell you the truth.
While Polly was trying to make up his mind between Richmond and Melbourne, a new force was taking shape out Glen Ferry way. Under former ruckman and captain John Kennedy, Hawthorn had risen from 7th in 1959 to 5th in 1960, and in 1961 emerged as the team to beat for the flag. They were nicknamed Kennedy's Commandos, and their Spartan training stood them in good stead on grand final day against Ted Whitten's Bulldogs. Before more than 107,000 fans, Footscray jumped the Hawks as expected and led by 8 points at half-time. Hawthorn's revival focused around outstanding centreman Brendan Edwards, who was to pick up 33 kicks in the match-winning display. While Edwards was on the rampage, the Bulldogs slowed noticeably, and apart from occasional bursts from captain-coach Ted Whitten, were completely overwhelmed. Edwards received great support from rover Ian Law, ruckman John Winicky, and captain Graham Arthur. In the third quarter, Hawthorn set up victory, kicking 6-6 to Footscray's 1-1, kicked by Whitten, and then the Hawks coasted home. They added 4 goals in the last quarter to a solitary goal from Footscray and ran out victorious by 43 points. It was Hawthorn's first grand final appearance, and a jubilant Graham Arthur accepted the cup and Ted Whitten's congratulations. Ruckman John Winicky was one of the ecstatic players who spoke to Lou Richards after the match.
This is magnificent.
You're really happy, are you?
I really am.
Listen, John, have you a girlfriend here tonight? The last time you didn't have one.
No, but a man would do anything after winning a grand final. I've got one tonight.
Even take a girl out.
That's right.
When the celebrations slowed, the flag was finally unfurled at Glen Ferry Oval on a bitterly cold April afternoon in 1962. Fans turned up in droves at Festival Hall that year to see Collingwood's captain Murray Weideman make his debut in the wrestling ring. Murray the Matman might not have thrilled Collingwood officials with his bravado against such heavies as the Zebra Kid, but he literally dragged people through the turnstiles. While the Weed had his ups, he also had his downs. One of the good guys of the 62 season was Geelong's Alistair Lord.
In your own heart of hearts, a really personal thought that you could perhaps win the Brownlow medal?
No, Ron, I couldn't say I did because we've had a number of good players at Geelong, and with Billy Goggin and Doug Wade and Graham Farmer before he was injured, playing so well, it was, well, you couldn't say you could have a chance.
On the field, 1962 was Essendon's year. The Bombers took over top spot after 6 rounds and never relinquished it. Twice they met Carlton during the season, winning the first encounter at Princes Park by 45 points, and the second this day at Windy Hill by 9 points. While Huey Mitchell was lining up for goal, Bomber fans were looking forward to September with good reason. First, they thrashed a Geelong side, depleted by injury to star ruckman Polly Farmer, and in the grand final beat Carlton by 7 goals. With a team studded with stars like Jack Clark, Ken Fraser, Hugh Mitchell and Jeff Leake, the Bombers looked and proved to be invincible. Afterwards, Lou Richards spoke to coach John Coleman.
To win a premiership, well, that just is the climax to a season.
It must be a terrific strain to you this year, John. Like the side has had a lot of, not a lot of worry, but last year you came here and the side didn't go so well, and then again this year, well, okay, you should be very happy with the way they've played.
Yes, we've had our worries. The drawn game gave us extra worries, and then just prior to the game today, Jeff Leake, but everything's turned out satisfactorily.
Youngsters to make his debut in 1963 was a blonde ruckman named Carl Ditrich. This match against Footscray was only his 10th, and the schoolboy made his presence felt.
Carl, lately you've been sort of branded as a bad man. What do you feel about this label? Do you think this label fits?
Oh, I don't know. It's just that it's my view or my aim to play football. That's the only way I can play football. I can't adopt it any other way. I've been playing like that ever since I can remember. I just can't change it overnight. I've just got to keep on playing like that and hope that nothing else or nothing major comes of it.
To Melbourne and was suspended for 2 matches. His skipper in Adelaide, Bobby Skilton, went on to win the Brownlow for the 2nd time. South Melbourne's champion Rover had also won the medal in 1959 on countback from St Kilda's full forward Verdon Howell. Even with Skilton in stunning form, South finished 11th in a year made memorable by the Big Cats.
His greatest season. His form was phenomenal. It won him 2 cars on Channel 7 sports shows for his superb play. Won him many hundreds of pounds worth of other prizes, as well as a position as joint runner-up with St Kilda's Darryl Baldock for the 1963 Brownlow medal. Tied at 17, they were only 3 points behind the winner, South Melbourne captain Bob Skilton. Farmer made up for a disappointing 1962 season with some blazing football in 1963. When he missed the ball in marks, he gathered it in from the ground. His handball was tremendous, and he fulfilled his ambition to star in a Victorian Football League grand final.
This was Ron Barassi's first appearance as a VFL coach. With Norm Smith away in Adelaide on interstate duties, the injured Barassi took over against Fitzroy and guided the Demons to a 67-point win. More about him a little later.
So we
in 1964, World of Sport introduced a great new contest.
Champion Kick Award. And today, in our first heat, it is Collingwood versus South Melbourne, and the 2 representatives nominated by their clubs, Johnny Mann from Collingwood, Bob Skilton from South Melbourne.
South's Bobby Skilton was the first to try his luck, and this day ran out the winner over John Mann. It was a competition that was to run for nearly a decade and produce some of the longest kicks the game has seen. Players were judged on style, accuracy and distance by Bruce Andrew, Jim Cleary and Thorold Merritt. Essendon coach John Coleman had to be restrained after this dust-up early in the 3rd quarter of the first semi-final against Geelong. Field umpire Ron Brophy cooled tempers, and Geelong went into the preliminary final, Essendon into mothballs. Like so many of the last 10 years, 1964 looked to be Melbourne's year. Big Gabbo had different ideas, however. The Collingwood gargantuan set off toward goal like a steam train to put his side in front with minutes to go. Then, in one of the most remarkable turnabouts in finals history, Melbourne back pocket Neil Crompton grabbed the ball from the pack and kicked the winning goal. Melbourne by 4 points, and Norm Smith had stretched his record to 6 flags in 10 years. For captain and hero Ron Barassi, it was destined to be his last appearance with the club for 17 years. And he stunned every supporter by applying for the Carlton coaching role.
Melbourne have always been great in their thinking, both on and off the field, and they've done things other clubs wouldn't do. They've done big things. Again, on and off the field, and this would be another example of it. I feel that I've given a long service, and I feel fairly good service.
Barassi won his clearance, and the Melbourne Empire collapsed. Without him, the Demons were destined to years in the football wilderness. At Carlton, he made a quick impact, however.
Racing after it is Barassi. Hall shepherds beautifully there. Hall picks up, hand passes to Barassi. Barassi hooks it in. He shapes up, he shoots through an acute angle. Oh, remarkable!
Just to prove that age is no barrier to a living legend, Captain Blood made a long-awaited return to Punt Road to help teach a couple of youngsters how to kick goals. The man who invented the drop punt and made ultra-baggy shorts fashionable laced on the boots and pulled on the number 17 Guernsey he wore in 310 encounters and calmly kicked a few through the middle. Little did Jack Dyer realise that one of his pupils, little Kevin Bartlett, would eclipse his club record in 1979. This day, however, Kevin Bartlett and Mick Irwin looked a little starstruck. Over at the MCG, St Kilda's beanpole half-forward Ian Cooper took one of the marks of the 60s against Melbourne. Cooper's teammate Ian Stewart was also to soar to great heights in 65. Stewie tied for the Brownlow with North's Noel Teasdale, but won it on countback. The MCG crowd paid tribute to Stewie, then, a few weeks later, witnessed one of the controversies of the decade, the Somerville incident.
Hello, there's a player out on the ground. Somerville has just collapsed.
I don't think he collapsed. Noel Teasdale, what happened? Did you see it?
No, Mike, I didn't see it. The only thing I saw was Somerville falling to the ground and Wright just walking away. It doesn't look very good, though. I don't think that he's collapsed from his own sources.
Hello, there's a bit of jostling going on down there.
Wait a minute, this fellow's had a lot of illnesses, Mike. Now, let's be quite honest about this. It looks pretty serious. He's just collapsed.
John Somerville was to miss the grand final, but his teammates went on to take the flag.
Sends it up towards the wing position on the outer side of the ground. Cooper is there. Cooper...
For some, the question was never in doubt.
Did you win this from the very start? Oh, well, pretty confident, Lou. Not overconfident, but you've got to have a certain amount of confidence, you know. We were very confident.
66, and for the only time in 392 senior games, Polly was reported for striking Hawthorn's delicate Des Dixon. The VFL Tribunal let him off the charge. 1966 was a hectic year for Big Cow. Against Melbourne, Ditrich sent wingman Brian Dixon crashing to the ground in front of the smoker's stand and got off with a warning. Later in the year, the boisterous St Kilda ruckman was reported for striking Fitzroy's Darryl Peoples, was suspended for 6 matches and missed a premiership berth. At Footscray, captain-coach Ted Whitten got the sack in his testimonial year.
I was told a testimonial would be run for me. They've had a couple of Sunday mornings and a picnic, Mike, in those 5 years, and it's still going.
For the 2nd year in a row, the Brownlow medal was won by St Kilda's brilliant centreman Ian Stewart. It was a great year for both Stewie and the Saints. Runners-up in 1965, St Kilda bounced back to snatch its first premiership in 1966. The Saints weren't used to collecting cups, and Sir Kenneth Luke came close to presenting the trophy to Des Tuddenham. For Collingwood's coach, Bob Rose, it was a bitter defeat.
We'll come up, I feel, but hell spells. It was bloody disappointing today.
Neither St Kilda nor Collingwood could keep up with Richmond in 1967.
Across the face of goal, right in towards that forward pocket, and a glorious
The recruit of the
mark
year and the mark of the year. Richmond's young centre-half forward, Royce Hart, soars over Peter Walker to take this classic mark. While Richmond roared towards the grand final, they came across one giant obstacle, the immovable frame of John Nichols. Neville Crowe was found guilty of striking Nichols, and the Richmond captain was suspended for 4 matches. To this day, he denies having made contact with his open hand. But Big Nev was there on grand final day to see the action.
Colonelli picks up. He tries a long one. Neville Crowe, for the benefit of our viewers in New Guinea and our viewers interstate, got 4 weeks for striking a few weeks ago. And Hudson now,
in 1968, 2 individual efforts stood supreme.
Out, if that, directly in front. And umpire Jolly waving Collingwood players away. Here it is. Up comes Hudson, concentrating. He kicks. He's put it through. It's 100. And look at him. Oh, it's all over. The relief. The relief.
And a battered Bob Skilton took centre stage.
I'll tell you one thing, Bob. Here at TV ringside, I can say this honestly, you're amongst friends. Bob, this year of 1968, when you won the Brownlow medal and you've joined 2 other great players in Dick Reynolds and Hayden Bunton and winning 3 Brownlow medals. At the start of the season, did you think you could do it? Did you think you were going to have a good year?
No, this year has surpassed all my expectations, Ron. I make no secret of it. I tried to talk them into the back pocket.
For Ron Barassi, this was to be coaching triumph number 1.
George Davis, McKenzie takes it, the kick smothered. He tries the neck wrestle. The neck to McKenzie.
Siren's gone. The siren's gone, has it? Yes. Look at this. We couldn't hear the siren. Carlton are premiers. 8-5, 53 Essendon, Carlton 7-14, 56. Carlton are premiers. And look at this. Look at it. 21 years since a premiership. And look at old Barassi there.
In 1969, Doug Wade reached the century for the first time with this goal against Footscray.
Wade's mark going for 100 goals. See Wade kick his 100th goal, or I bet he's more nervous than the spectators. Wade comes in and kicks.
At 31, Kevin Murray was the oldest player ever to win the Charles Brownlow medal. On Grand Final day, Tom Hafey's Tigers made it 2 premierships in 3 years.
Richmond are premiers 1969. Ron Barassi over there with John Nichols. And they must be very dejected, but let's face it, Richmond were better on the day. There's Tommy Hafey being held aloft. The final scoreboard read, Carlton 8-12-60, Richmond 12...
In 1962, the VFL purchased 212 acres at Waverley to build the most modern football complex in the land. After 8 years of planning, building and controversy, the stadium was opened on April the 18th, 1970. 1970 saw the birth of VFL Park and the retirement of Ted Whitten. In 321 games, Whitten had built a huge reputation and was regarded by most as the complete footballer.
Do or die effort. It's going to be a determined thing. You've got to show me all the guts and all the determination you've got in your body. You've got to inspire me with this last quarter bit. You've been in front all day and you've got to stay there. Are you going to sit there?
Whitten's players responded to his final address as captain-coach and got up to beat Hawthorn by just 3 points. In 20 years, EJ had been the key to Footscray's success. He'd had run-ins with committees, had tasted the sack, but he always remained the crowd's hero. In 1970, Alex Jezelenko and Peter Hudson were to kick 100 goals. Another to pass the mark was Collingwood's Peter McKenna.
Merrigan was trying to hold him out. McKenna, I think, has got too much strength for American. He's 100 for the season from 45 yards out. He shoots with a drop punt. It's on line, it's through, and here they come. Here they come. The kids are coming on the ground now. McKenna has kicked his 100th goal.
For the first time since 1945, South Melbourne made the finals. A key mover in South Rise was centre-man Peter Bedford, who won the Brownlow medal from Gary Dempsey and Alex Jezelenko. In the first semi, a record crowd of 104,000 saw St Kilda end the Swans Premiership celebrations. It was to be another record crowd on Grand Final day. 121,000 people saw Collingwood build a 44-point lead over Carlton by half-time. Urgent reshuffling by coach Ron Barassi, 4 goals to little-known reserve Teddy Hopkins, and a heart-stopping finish saw Carlton emerge as 1970 premiers. This was the mark of the year in 1970, and one that is described as the classic mark in Australian football history. In 1971, Ian Stewart joined Bunton, Reynolds and Skilton as a 3 times winner of the Brownlow medal, and the only man to have won it with 2 clubs.
Brownlow medal for 1971 to yet another triple winner. Richmond player, Ian Stewart.
The 4th year in a row in which Hawthorn's Peter Hudson had topped the century. On grand final day, he was the man St Kilda just had to stop.
He's hurt. Well, you saw that.
With 150 goals up, Hudson needed just 1 more to become the highest goal scorer in a league season. He was destined to fail. Hudson started 1972 sensationally, kicking 8 goals in the first half of the opening match against Melbourne. It was to be his last appearance, however, for nearly 23 months.
They must be instructed to kick it to a position, and Hudson knew exactly where it was going.
He's in trouble. I've seen Hudson with an injured knee before, but nothing that has appeared as serious as that.
He's in pain, real pain.
Last vote finishers provided melodrama for Brownlow cuts, but few were crueler than in 1972.
Thompson's won it. He's won it. On the last vote, 25. 25 votes to Len Thompson and 22 to Greg Wells.
In his first year as captain-coach, John Nichols took Carlton to a premiership and a record grand final score.
Jones, a great game, probably the best game he's ever played for the Blues in his whole career. Which was the centre of the
in the national championships in Adelaide, just a few days later, Percy Jones had the smile wiped from his face by affable Mal Brown from Perth. Carlton lost the fight and the championship.
Mal Brown is...
By August 1973, Peter Hudson was back in action with 8 goals in his return match against Collingwood.
I wasn't nervous, Mike, at all. I was more... it was more of a mystery, you know, as to how the day was going to go, because it's been, first of all, it was so long. Secondly, I'm coming back after a pretty bad injury, and, you know, I just didn't know what to make of it all.
The grace of Keith Gregg was one of the delights of the mid-70s. The North Melbourne wingman made the state team in his first year, and in 1973 won the Roos' first Brownlow. From the grace of Gregg to the sheer ugliness of the game, the Windy Hill Riot took place on May 18, 1974. Richmond won the match. Football was the big loser. North made the grand final under Barassi in 1974. But it was destined to be Richmond's year.
He's going to come out with a David Thorpe back into the attack for Richmond. Bartlett comes in there. That was it from the member side. Oh, it's just about a mark, I'd say.
Can't take the mark.
The beginning of the 1975 season was marred by the tragic injury to Footscray's South Australian recruit, Neil Saxey. Saxey became a quadriplegic after this collision with Fitzroy's Kevin O'Keefe. It was a triumphant year for North Melbourne. The Roos took their first VFL Premiership with play like this.
And Greig's got the run now, and that was a shot for the goal. Now he's hooked it across. Now he couldn't get the mark that time. We see the ball coming back now to Cable. Cable a little quiet in the first quarter, gives a hand pass back to Barry Davis. Under pressure as he hooks the ball wide. Bridus going after it. In goes Knights, and they both meet. It's all right for Bridus. He's given a hand pass back to Shimmerbush, a snap for goal. And a beauty.
The MCG in the 1975 grand final, the final scoreboard reads North Melbourne 19-8.
A triumph for North and for super coach Ron Barassi.
It was magic, it really was.
Has it changed?
Oh, well, first is something special. Not many people in the modern era can claim that joy. Hawthorn 61, Footscray 54, and St Kilda 66, and North Melbourne 75. All the other famous clubs had their